Hi everybody, thanks so much. Delighted to be here, it's completely amazing. I looked at a few videos last night which I should not have done at all because they were very scary how amazing everyone has been, and completely humbling to see Peter just before now holding miles in his hand, and it's it's a very architectural refrain we always have about less is more. We were asked to sort of try and push ourselves outside of our comfort zone a bit. And I suppose because I'm uncomfortable with not saying very much often in the way that I speak, I often blizzard everyone with images, generally a slide of about 1,000, so I've tried to limit it to about 300, which I hope will kind of get through quickly enough. I'm also going to try and talk about architecture in a way that I'm quite uncomfortable about doing as well. I'm going to try and talk about the houses that we do very briefly and come back to a kind of another form of architecture at the end, stuff that we actually do as opposed to stuff that we say that we do that never gets done, which is the bulk of the talk, the sort of experimental projects. So we are Atmos, we're an architecture collective, and a lot of our work is really trying to be not us, it's trying to be stuff about data, about the world, about you, about people in general. And the stuff that, I suppose one of the reasons that I'm very interested in architecture is the way that it's beyond my control. It's not an art form, it's non-authorial, it's non-subjective, it needs clients and we need to activate their stuff. So I'm going to talk very briefly about a little house that we're just finishing off now in Battersea for some wonderful clients. Connecting to the soil of before. She's a gardener. She's an incredible gardener, and it's just it reminds you that any piece of architecture is always embarrassing. It's always rudimentary in comparison to the nature that's around it. So the task is sort of like, how on earth are we going to ever do anything that can compete with the wonders that she makes? The old building's to the left there, our stuff is to the right. What we were trying to do is find a language that could express the amazingness that she is. I've never told her this, so if she ever watches this video, I don't know, I guess she'll find out. And in some ways, she initially hated what we were doing, so it seems completely perverse that it was for her that we were doing it. But it's in essence an attempt to somehow psychologically pull out parts of who she is and what she does, and a sort of hymn to her talents as a gardener. So we have an old house which we're refurbishing, and we're pulling all of the garden inside, and we're trying to blur between the outside living space, effectively where she spends all of her time, and the inside living space. So we're simply pulling these tendrils, which in a way often refers back to the language of the plants themselves, all the curves which are already enshrined in bits of the old architecture there, certain curvaceous forms of sorts, and it amalgamates itself most strongly in this central area, which is the stair. The stair is a completely machine fabricated thing. It hasn't had any human hand, apart from my hand on the mouse, form the lines. So it's a series of lines hanging from space that then curl around and form every step. So everything is a sort of slight ecosystem. The balustrade is the same thing that you step on. This is trying in some way to be a reference to the garden that she's then been cultivating herself. And it's a series of lines in space that each get, over the course of the design, modulated and reparametrized to suit the shape. The building was constantly in flux as we were designing it. There's lots of different forces that we're constantly trying to control. But what's amazing about all of this is that the lines that we draw are not representational anymore. They're actually direct instructions to the machine to cut the stuff that lies beneath it, which is a complete kind of paradigm shift. It's a little bit like the seed that you plant in the ground. It's a direct link now. It's the code itself to actually making. So it's no longer some kind of social interpretation of what the hell is this drawing, what do I do with this kind of thing. It's just directly out there. So here we see at the very top these lines that are just drifting, the balustrade that needs to prevent you from falling, the sort of very initial act of gravity, that are then drifting downwards and slowly curling. These are all pieces made of flat wood, just machine cut on a CNC bed. It's actually very simple technology. It's been around since the 70s. And on the outside of it, all of these fine balustrade elements are then curling around and sort of disappearing, kind of like organic creepers. They go underneath of the stairs, which is a bathroom space. We're trying to make every space sort of sacred and special. These are the beams that then kind of drift down again. And in general, throughout the house, all of the spaces are interconnected and fluid. The ceilings have voids carved in them, which are the spaces left over between the steel and the wooden joists, because it's an old house. And these kind of flow between all of the spaces, all all the furniture is sort of integrated as much as we can, because in a garden it's the same thing. There's this sort of seamlessness. Where does your soil stop? Where does it become more chalky? You can't draw the line in a way, you can't stop it. The funny thing was, when we came to actually photograph this a few weeks ago, we'd set up this date with the builders, and I turned up and I kind of got all these props, and I work on Brick Lane, which has got these amazing butchers. You go in there and you see stuff that you just cannot place on a beast anywhere, you know, really weird contorted objects, and you'd love to be able to design them. So here's a heart from one of those things, and I had bags of dripping stuff. They gave it to me covered in blood. I was just like, wow, shit, scary. And we were going to distribute this stuff throughout the house as a sort of reference to the pulsing life within that then slowly moves and becomes more vegetal. But it wasn't finished, so I had to chuck all this sort of stuff away. There's another house that's also that we're just starting now, which again contains, he's a comedian actually, so completely different sort of seeds, but the building is seen a little bit like a tree up above, and its roots then growing down below, and so we're designing this environment which is a whole series of root systems, much more sort of chaotic and dark and gothic, which then interweave between everything. Now the digital component of that stuff, where automatic fabrication is made from lines, had a precursor in a pavilion which we had to make very quickly a few years ago. It was actually for something called Tent London. It had to be erected in 48 hours, and the brief was to do an office space for the future. And the idea was simply to take the shapes that everyone sits in and moves through and compact them all into an office. An office could be anything. Some of you might regard this as work. You know, in work often we are sitting down, sometimes we're lying down. I sleep at work the whole time if I'm lucky, so you know, I need a reclining space. So what is the sort of ergonomic position of work? Well, this was a series of cinematic frames suggesting a position for the human body running through it, of all of these positions aggregated at once. It was a 5 meter high, 5 meter wide thing, so that would typically be 2 stories. We suggested it could actually be 4, and you could pack people in as a sort of ironic reference to the kind of real estate markets of London. So you could get 81 people into this 5 by 5 by 5 meter cube thing. So we start again with the same stuff, just dumb mute material. Here it was plywood, not MDF. 8 sheets hinged together, they then cut out, they hinge down, fold down, and you ship them off. And so you erect these things as kind of cinematic frames up in space, and they just sort of assemble themselves along. Here's an example of one of these pieces all being patched together. We rebuilt it in Hong Kong. For about 10% of the price for a biennale there. And it actually, ironically, it was in an old prison building, which is the host of the biennale does kind of look slightly barred. And what was incredible about this is that the students that went and inhabited this thing, we did loads of workshops at universities and they helped us build it and stuff. We're like, this is just like home, except it's slightly bigger. You know, it's a completely micro environment kind of thing. On the other side of things, so that's quite material, and that's the stuff that I'm embarrassed about, with a sort of slight tendency away perhaps from soil and foundations towards aerial stuff and maybe luminous stuff in general, and temporal activation. So we started doing video, and now in a way we moved into light a little bit occasionally with some things. This is a tiny little installation in a bar in London. I sort of hate bars. I mean, I love the idea of them. It's like, what a great thing. I would probably prefer the coffee houses of old, you know, these great sort of intellectual debate chambers, but why would I go somewhere where I can't hear anyone and I can't really see anything and I have to wait forever for a drink? I mean, I don't like the idea of replacing humans, but I do think that we should have robotic bartenders. But anyway, just this idea of waiting forever until your drink gets, you know, what a painful experience. So we just simply suggested that actually all of your movements and agitation and disappointment could be somehow generative of a kind of luminous environment. So as you move around, we've got camera tracking there, and it's generating particle systems which are then bouncing off of mirrors up above and onto the bar step below. So you're aware of what everyone's doing. In Belfast last year, we then did a reinterpretation of this, a little bit broader, a little bit more architectural, less sort of flat graphics. It's called Lumiskin. And we simply filled the space with a very light haze, so it's not like a mist, you can hardly see it. And we projected into that, and this just shows that you can have one projector or you can have 3. We projected into that the outline as seen by a camera of someone when they walk into the space. So when you walk into the space, there's nothing going on. You're like, this is a shit fucking exhibition, it doesn't work at all. Well, that's because you're not there, and it needs you, so it's activated by you. So the camera sees you. You don't really see anything yet, but what it's seeing, this is now just moving slightly outside of the position, point of view of the camera. That's actually what then ends up happening, is we have the intersection of the projective geometry with the haze of particle systems into space which then generate this sort of environment around you. And it's completely sticky. You can't escape this thing. It's completely real time. There's no time lag unless you've got a really slow computer. We had then various people and dancers and so on come through and move through this space. But it's an automated architecture made only by you. So you generate the space itself. You'll say, well, it's not shelter. Sure, it's not shelter, but it is space around you. Other projects that also deal with the way that people construct spaces themselves is a big strand we're very interested in about surveillance. Surveillance being the sort of very contemporary architecture, which is a sort of control mechanism. Let's say architecture has always been a defense thing against the climate for one, but also against people. So surveillance is obviously this hugely efficient system for keeping people at bay, and we possibly have a negative aspect, a negative sort of feel of it, but of course our phone is a surveillance mechanism and it's very useful to us. So we're terribly interested as architects at the kind of positive aspects as well as the negative aspects of surveillance, and also how we straddle the two with kind of this, we call it ambivalence a little bit, that we're pro and con. This is a place I used to teach called the Architectural Association in Bedford Square, opposite the British Museum. 160 rooms inside this labyrinth of about 4 listed buildings and other muse things, but you have no clue what's going on inside there. So a space that spawns acres of publications has no information system to help anyone understand what the hell's going on. So you look at this facade, you see a little bit of light behind there, you just have some kind of inkling. And the project that we set ourselves was to tell everyone what's going on inside this space. That space would finally be important, not just the drawings that we published in the magazines that we sold ourselves. And this is a sort of little section just showing how, as you walked into the building, where the installation is in the room just above you. The simple idea was to take the whole building and push it into one room at a reduced scale model of 1:6. So this little white cube that you see here is a map of this room compressed into itself. It's a 1:6, a sort of temporal model of time. We're simply stacking all of the plans of stuff. And by the way, the other comfort zone that I'm abandoning is use of video, because this is kind of more easily told by video, but that would maybe be too seductive. So I've got to try and make the effort to just show you with visuals. So we're shoving all of the plans of the building in, and what we're doing is we're notating where all of the lights are in the building, lights being a signifier of function. So I'm being blinded right now by these white lights because I am speaking. You're not being blinded because you're listening. Fluorescence denotes some form of kind of inhabitation, incandescence another, halogen another. We were simply taking these lights as instructions for use of some sort, and then we were monitoring when they went on or off. And that would give us a sense of who's in the building and where. And ironically, it was all around a big chandelier, which is the most expensive piece of real estate in the whole building. And this gives you a sense of some of the lights being on and off. So we're putting 1,027 lights in this space, each one of which is simply an X-ray scale model reference to a light somewhere else in the building at its exact location. So if you're the only people in the building in this exhibition space, this chandelier, its representation, is illuminated. If the lecture hall is also illuminated, then the building starts glowing more and more as more inhabitation happens, until you get kind of complete whiteout with full occupancy, which never happened. By the way, we found out the graduate school is never there. Interesting for government cuts, I won't tell Cameron. So these are all the zones of the building, which we then essentially are networking together. We're bringing everyone together through all this system. And in fact, it was interesting when we went through the plans that we discovered this sort of weird little John Malkovich sort of half-height space sort of hidden between all the stairs, which doesn't really fit on a plan, but basically it's a sort of great journey of discovery. The original sensing material, there was no sensing infrastructure, it's a Georgian building, was infrared sensors and also cameras, because we're trying to render transparent what's actually happening. Now, we're not showing the image, we're analyzing the image. So much like with the other stuff, we're doing image detection, image analysis. We're analyzing the image for paths within it so that we know which lights to actually activate. And so that didn't actually end up happening. We didn't have any sponsorship. It's always the same old story about what you do with the budget. So we ended up actually with more devolved sensors in things like doors. So when you went into the toilet, you then activated it when you knew someone was there. We actually still have sensors in the seats of people in the offices. So every time they sit down, we sort of know that they're there, which is sort of quite naughty. So all about bums, really, isn't it? Then what we had to do with these lights is figure out how we're going to show them. If we put 1,027 incandescent lamps, we would have completely blown up the building. So we went for an LED kind of eco solution, but you can't see LEDs until they're hitting something. Now, we could have just hung them all up in the air, but we were trying to express some quality of the light in there. So, and in fact I've left off the diagrams, but each one of the light types generates a different type of LED fixture on each one of these tiny little lights. And we did that all via a script. So we built a virtual environment, we took all the points of the lights in space and generated all these vectors which are simply seeking the corners of the room of each one of these lights, because that's sort of the way that you see light. You see it in transition points. So each one of these lights then generates a bespoke object, and here's in the sense of hordes of these pieces, which then got delivered to us, 2054, which we had to sort of dissect and erect into tiny little things like this, which are simply hymns to that space, hymns to what that light is like in that little space itself. You're seeing a little heat sink there, which is distributing the heat off of the LED, and that's the crucial thing that holds these two polycarbonate clips together. And this isn't CNC cut, this is laser cut. And that we had two different colours of LED warm and cold, and there you see it up looking at the ceiling, mirrored ceiling with a little plan of the building etched in it. You start to see the datums, the sort of magic floating datums of where lights are set, and people could then go and wander in amongst this. And we also, because we were capturing the data, we could then play it back in time lapse, so you could watch the whole day in reverse and sort of see how people are kind of running in and out of the corridor. And there was a little online presence where you could see the plans, see where people were at any one time, and you could also take a slice of time and then see how, with this plan, how long the occupancy had lasted. This then led to a commission which didn't actually materialise, but we spent about a year on it, for the Cutty Sark, which was again about tracking people. That's of course what transport does, is it tracks trains, it tracks people as well, and that data has just been released. Maybe many of you have seen how buses have been mapped kind of in a quick 2-hour hack job, which is brilliant. We were suggesting for the Cutty Sark station, which is deep underground, that we would bring daylight but also human light to it of some sort. So we inject these strands down through the bottom. They're just simply finding the form of the building itself. Right down at the bottom, these spaghettis then kind of stretch out along the edges of the railway, and they have embedded in them, they're LED strands, bright enough to actually illuminate the ground, but there's a series of cameras running all the way along there too. These are not the 15 surveillance cameras of the actual infrastructure themselves. They're simply tracking cameras, then detecting a kind of little heat map of where people are, and then activating the light accordingly. So we were running a rhythm of all the colours of the sky up above, bringing that down instead of like a kind of light pipe. We're actually trying to sample the actual colour of the sky down below. But as people then start to move through the station, the more activity there is, the more rush of kind of white light. So as the train comes past, you see a great sort of blast of white light. Another project which is about sampling light, but now the colours of light from all around the world, was for Canary Wharf. We were commissioned to do something, again this didn't happen, for a 300-metre long space just outside of the Canary Wharf Tower. Here's a sun map of it. It's this space, the sort of green space that you see just off to the left there. Ironically, it gets no light. And we were realizing that light is becoming a huge commodity these days with the emerging solar markets. Every day there's new news about new PV films, solar tower, combination of kind of solar energy. There's so many maps kind of blasted around the world about kind of how we're trying to retain not stuff that's in the soil, but the stuff that's hitting the soil, the sun itself. And we were trying to do a project which was, I did hear someone say last year that designers make no sense, and I'm sure I'm making completely no sense, but we were trying to do a project that was spatially specific, but also culturally specific to the Docklands and Canary Wharf. So all of these people that are sort of aggregating financial data about the world. The Docklands used to be the biggest dock in the world. It was connected ever as a sort of pre-internet. It's named after all these places in the world, and it's peppered with these things which are real-time information, but also art projects, bizarrely, by can't remember his name, but clocks referencing what's actually happening around the world only in a quantitative way. So we were saying, well, what about the quality? What's that world like? What's Tokyo look like now? What's the colour of the sky? Where's dawn? Where's dusk? It doesn't matter if they're woken or not. And trying to encourage people to observe even their own surroundings. Now, just looking at the map of the world, it takes about an hour for the sun to move over a distance about twice the width of the UK. It takes about 5 seconds for it to move across the Isle of Dogs, and it takes about 1.2 seconds for it to cross our actual site itself. So we were proposing a solar midday, a recognition, of something that we'd lost. We're right opposite GMT, GMT being the thing that sort of crushed our sense of local time, that we now have a regulated time, so all the trains, it was railway time essentially, chronologically all linked together. And it's very interesting. We're doing a project right now, maybe this is an interlude where I don't flick. We're doing a project for Saudi Arabia. In fact, I've signed a non-disclosure agreement, so I'm now breaking that, and you can edit this out if I have to be, punished by my client. But we're doing something for Saudi Arabia where we're designing a city for 100,000 people, and one of the key things they want to do is it's got to be a carbon neutral city. We're suggesting you could even be carbon negative, that we deal with the problems of Riyadh and stuff like that. Obviously, it's all about social behavioural change. Oh my God, is that the time? Have I got 2 minutes left? Wow, okay, I'm not going to tell you. Interlude over later. So we take the map of the world and we then blast it onto the site. Sorry, I'm just so clueless. I hadn't even looked at the dashboard. And we then identify all of the cities of the world, and we say that we're going to then put a significant light bit there. So it's a little bit like the night map of the world. You see the kind of illumination of kind of major world cities. And what we do is we add to all of this data things like population and altitude, because that will change the colour of the light there. So all we're doing is we're trying to capture locally the colour of the sky and beam it into Canary Wharf, which is indifferent with all of its crunching of kind of LED screens just showing numbers kind of thing, trying to add quality back. So we're growing a series of branches with rings on the top of them, which have got LEDs running around them, and each one of those is referencing the solar path locally. So I've just moved from the north, and I'm moving towards the equator now, this branch here. This is just at the top of the equator. This is all of the different parts of the world, and this is all of the ingredients which are then strewn on site onto these branches which grow out of the water. They have to kind of aggregate into trunks. And these are various shots looking through this landscape of something that simply tells you at a glance what it looks like in the world. So if previously Light Hive, which is called, gave you an image of a school, this gives you an image of the world. I'm going to rush on in order to try and get time and not steal from everyone else's conversation. This was a project for Sydney. It was called Smart Light. And it was simply meant to be something which was to do with digital and light. We were originally thinking, inspired by the wildfires, whether we could do something in real time about the wildfire, but we couldn't get the information. Then we're looking at kind of imaging systems of the sun. This is a total sky imager. It's only 200 pixels wide and updates once a minute, so it's too feeble. So what we were looking at is downloading satellite stuff every 15 minutes, which is fairly frequent cloud cover, which was interspersed with real-time sun footage. Now, we couldn't get hold of real-time sun footage, so this is going to then lead on to the kind of conclusion part of the talk, which is a little bit about social networks. So what we then did, the map that you see here, which you can't really see, I'm sorry, what it's showing is it's showing Sydney over there, and it's showing kind of the strands of which sun is hitting the Earth over the course of the 6 hours of this exhibition every evening. And what we were then doing, and this is showing how long that sun lasts relative each time the sunrise happens. What we were going to show is that as soon as the sun set in Sydney, where is it rising in the world and what does it look like? And because we couldn't get real-time solar data here, what we asked is we tapped into that whole community of time-lapse people and asked them to send us stuff that they took the day before, which was a sort of incredible revision of the project away from kind of more hardcore technical geography into a sort of much softer geography of, the flavour and language of the lens, of the hand, of the eye, of all these different people. And we simply flipping, because of course maps are relative, I'm sorry you can't see this slide at all, but maps are always generally oriented north to our minds. Of course, Southern Hemisphere maps are flipped, and this is flipped as a sort of time map of how at each increment, we were just basing it on the major cities that we'd hit along the way in our kind of path through the world. That's the pavilion with 4 projectors blasting up, giving you a little slice of light. Now there's just and some sample imagery. Now the final project before my kind of conclusion was a proposal for London for a landmark for the Olympics. It was an invited competition, and Anish Kapoor won it with some big sculpture. We were suggesting you could do something which was man-made and performative and kind of participatory and bottom-up. It wasn't top-down. It was about the weather again, this great British obsession. Our history of weather painting is not just of the natural, but also the artificial, Turner and pollution. And our cloud, our team itself was like a cloud. It was 24/7 across the world, people based in all of these different cities. It was called The Cloud. It's a series of bubbles. They're floating in air. You can take a ramp all the way up to the top. You arrive and you look out over the city, and it's an observation point physically, but also digitally, because it's covered in LED pixels, which then relay real-time display of data, which is partly contributed by you. So just in the same way that a cloud is not just a sort of form, but also a series of droplets, and I'm sorry, and over time I'll rush through, we were suggesting that this, you could look at it and you could tell the time of day by the kind of information it was displaying. You could tell the mapping system, you could place yourself in relation to London as you move in, see what's happening on the network, see who else is in the cloud, where they're doing, point a kind of red carpet to your home, map to London boroughs or to Britain at large or Europe, or which gold medal has been won by which country, in which direction are they. All of this stuff based on pixels. So we were suggesting then also these pixels could be collectively owned by the public. And that map could then be shared between London, the UK, Europe and the world. It was the microdonation Obama model and Howard Dean before him. So you're entering this great field of LEDs, which is showing top-down information as much as the stuff that you're supplying it with, Olympic moments, whether they're land or sky or water or terrestrial or other cultural projects where people are, nighttime stuff. We were suggesting you could do fireworks that are virtual now and even just get rid of the actual old flame and just run it on the LEDs as you look up into this thing. My final point is about a different form of architecture entirely, and it's about an architecture of people. We run this thing, Sinead's in the audience and she runs it with me. It's called Latitudinal Cuisine, and it's simply sort of suggesting that eating alone is an inevitable tragedy, that a city is, as someone famously said, a place where we all go to get lonely together. There's this idea that in a city like London, where I happen to live, there's a huge amount of knowledge, huge amount of diversity, a huge amount of understanding how to cook different things and lots of different ingredients. So what we do is a potluck dinner where everyone contributes. No one's asked how much spent or anything like that. All we do is we move a degree a day from GMT around the world. So we do 360 degrees in 360 days. And we just cook wherever we hit, kind of thing. So we've just gone through a very strange period of Polynesia and Tonga before arriving in America and Mexico. So a kind of indicative map of where we started, or the hotbed of where we all are. You can see these scan lines moving as we progress, and everyone kind of takes their latitude along this scan line. That's our little logo, and whatever anyone brings is, whatever it is, we all, anyone brings whatever they can. We had this dinner for 100 people, it was bring your own country. Will stood up and said, I'm American and I brought cookies! And those are the cookies. Someone did an Indian flan for a brunch, we had a Japanese session. All this stuff, it's getting us outside of our comfort zone. We don't just go back to French. We did one which was about garden, where we cooked with flowers. These are ricotta flowers. People did one about eggs. Banana leaves have appeared a few times. I had this disastrous session where I cooked something for Vietnamese Tet, which is Happy New Year. Stewed it. It was the longest thing ever. It took 10 hours to cook, and it was absolutely inedible. That's what it looked like, but no one ever ate it. I had another disaster. We did an architectural edible edifices one. I tried to make a vertical salad. This is a version of it where someone else managed to do a vertical dessert, which is their vision there. Politics of food we did last week, which is Eid and 9/11 combined, so fig kind of suggesting peace and so on. But actually it's not about food, it's about people. And it's all about getting people together to kind of collectively co-create stuff of their own making, of their own choice. This is the dinner for 100 people. That's the kind of long roll of the table. It was 33 meters long. We've got about 3 slides left. It was a map of the world where you actually placed your stuff on the map. So basically you mapped where you actually lived, and that's how we started out. And we've got a plan to kind of, our ideal would be to have one of these every day, one of them around the world, anywhere. We're designing a table which is based on the world map, so it takes all the slices of the stuff above, but of course, the soil below too, the soil below the sea. It uses each one of those slices as something for us to actually sit on. So we sit just below sea level and we dine off of the world itself. I think there's a little video which we could probably sort of skip because I'm completely out of time. So my small do would be invite a stranger to dinner. My large do, which is a reference to the thing that's missing from everything that I've shown, there's the table kind of thing emerging slowly, will probably be to help someone else make music in whatever way that is. So it could be this, music, you could be deaf, you're not literally making sound kind of thing, but help someone else have voice somehow. Thank you very much.